Welcome everyone to the final round between Nogerbek, Kazybek and Gharibyan Mamikon. The game started with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5, knight c3, and now Nogerbek goes c takes d5. Mamikon, who has the half point lead in this tournament, takes back with the pawn. A draw might be good enough for him to get a joint first. But Nogerbek with the white pieces needs to play for a win, which is never easy. He goes bishop f4. You can look at the clock. He's 15 minutes behind already out of the opening. So he's taken his time in order to play here. Mamikon goes bishop b4. So he pins this knight. It's a much more active move than, let's say, bishop e7 in the position. And now Nogerbek once again thinks a bit, brings his rook to c1 square. White now can actually castle, black can castle, but he goes knight e4. He pins the knight here and tries to put pressure on the c3 knight. e3 might be a normal move, but queen b3 is played, attacking the bishop and also the pawn on d5. And now Mamikon takes on c3. So bishop takes c3 is on the board. So you've given up the bishop pair. That's already some imbalance in the position. Nogerbek takes back with the pawn. His rook is now on a closed file. However, there is pressure in the center and he's also bolstered his center there. Knight comes to b6. Excellent move. Taking control of the c4 square. Black has very firm control on the light squares. e3 might be a possible move, but then you have to contend with g5, and that's the reason why Nogerbek goes here h4, and now he stopped g5, but at the same time he could be preparing some rook swings with rook h3 later on. Of course, the bishop here is right now looking at this square, so it's not possible. Also, you can gain space with h4, h5. The queen comes to e7. Let's see how white continues now. Queen b4, excellent move. The point is to put pressure on c7. So if the queen is exchanged, c7 pawn is a bit weak. And if you take and play c6, then this b5 will later come on for a minority attack. So that's the reason why Mamikon goes bishop to f5, and he's ready to part away with some material, it seems. Because let's say after the queen trade, king takes, bishop takes c7 would not be such a great idea because of rook h c8, and there's a lot of pressure on the c3 pawn. So taking that pawn does not make sense, but the queens are traded. Queen takes e7 by Nogerbek, and now Mamikon, you can see he's actually gone low on time. He's for 45 minutes on the clock, while Nogerbek has 55 minutes. King takes e7 played. And now the knight jumps to e5. I like this move a lot because the idea is to play f3 and eventually maybe g4 or e4 in the center. Mamikon goes h5. And this is not particularly a great idea because of a very specific tactic. After f3, knight d6, you go for the move c4. And after takes, you play e4. And you have pressure here. So this would have been a good way to continue with f3 and e4. Let's see if Nogerbek finds this idea. No, he goes e3, which is much more solid and opens up the bishop, maybe preparing for the c4 break. Gharibyan now needs to figure out what to do against c4. So he comes back with his knight and he tells his opponent that I'm going to take control of the c4 square. Bishop comes to e2. And just developing naturally. He plays his pawn to c6. Eventually you also want to kick off this knight away from e5 square with f6. So right now Nogerbek thinking, and he goes f3. So yes, he is preparing c4 and g4 ideas. Also sometimes e4 could become possible. Mamikon thinks deeply and pushes his pawn to f6. He attacks the knight in the center, so the knight has to move away now. But where exactly can it go to? I think d3 is the only square. Knight d3 comes in. The position is still complicated. Nogerbek as white wants to play for a win, but black is very solid here. Knight c4 played, and king comes to f2, just connecting the rooks and also defending the e3 square. Black now plays his, he's going to touch his b5 pawn, b pawn, push it to b5 it seems. He goes instead b6. It's slightly curious, but I think he didn't want the white knight to settle down on c5. Now bishop takes d6. Very committal decision there by Nogerbek, but he also understood that these knights were so firmly entrenched in his position, he needed to give one up, his bishop up for the knight. King takes on d6. And now what do you do next? He plays his knight to f4. This knight is actually well placed. It is putting pressure on h5. It is stopping the rook from activating. So b5 played here. Well, also rook e8 was feasible, but then he would have taken the knight. So b5 and Nogerbek goes a4. So if you try to win this pawn, then after bishop c4, dc4 and e4, white is completely better here, clearly fighting for the win. So that's the reason why taking on a4 would not be correct. He goes a5, gaining space on the queen side. Take on b5. And with this, a small change has happened, that the a pawn is now a passed pawn in the position. Let's see how that changes things. Nogerbek plays his rook to a1. And he's kind of looking at this pawn, maybe making way for his rook to come through the queen side. Bishop c2 played. This is a very interesting maneuver by Mamikon. He wants to play bishop to b3 and then push his pawn to a4. So rook c1. And now the bishop has to move. So bishop b3 seems very logical. And if you attack the bishop, a4 will be played. E4 by Nogerbek with 22 minutes on the clock. His opponent has 11 minutes. We are on move 25. E4 is a cool move. He takes. And you can see that the time that black has spent in trying to bolster his queen side here has led to white creating play on the h5 pawn, which now cannot be defended. He plays a4. So now a3 and a2 can be also pushed in with the support of the knight and the bishop. For now, Nogerbek says, thank you so much for the pawn. Knight takes h5. White is a pawn up now. But black rook has got an active on the h file. Rook a7 seems like a logical move to defend the g7 pawn, and he does it. He plays his rook to a7. Good play by Mamikon there. And Nogerbek now, we have to see what is his move next. He plays knight g3. This is a good move. You can't be winning this pawn now because of knight f5 check and you lose the rook. So that's the reason why you have to find something else. Maybe move the king away. But he goes g6 and he's just taking control of the f5 square. Well, let's see what white continues with here. He plays h5. I really like this move because with h5 he's not only trading the pawn but also making the access to the f5 square possible. Mamikon now deciding what to do. G takes h5 played, which is a good move here. The knight takes on h5 and also now you are threatening to take on f6 followed by e5 check. So you have to defend the f6 pawn. And how is he going to do that? A few ways are rook f8. He goes rook h6. So that's interesting move. And 15 minutes now for Nogerbek, 8 minutes for Mamikon. We are on move number 31. 30 moves have been completed. Knight comes back to g3 with the idea of giving a check on f5. Now Mamikon has to figure out what are the next moves that he's going to play. He goes king c6. He moves out of the check here for the knight. White is a pawn up, but how do you continue is a good question, because if you push your pawn to d5, king will settle on the c5 square. So rook b1 played, rook c b1. Okay, maybe the threat is to take here. Let's say if I make a move like this, then rook takes, pawn takes, rook takes with a winning position. So clearly you have to be careful about rook takes b3 as a move. Goes king b6 and defends the rook on a7. Will Nogerbek just take the knight on c4 is the question. He plays knight to f5, which is also a good move. The knight moves into a strong square, attacking the rook on h6. The rook has to be defended now. Rook g6 could be an idea. Rook h2. He goes rook h8. Well, maybe now it's time to take this knight on c4, because that could really help here. And Nogerbek takes his time generally. In order to take make such an exchange, you need to consider everything closely. He takes it, but he now has only 5 minutes on the clock. They have to make 6 more moves to reach move number 40. So bishop takes c4. Mamikon can take back with the bishop. If you take back with the pawn, it doesn't feel right somehow. So more logical is to take back with the bishop. Yeah. Bishop takes c4 played here. And now if you go knight d6, trying to attack c4 and b5, then bishop d3 is possible. And then if you try to attack again, the rook is hanging. So you can't really succeed there. That's the reason why he goes rook to b4. It's an interesting move here, rook to b4. Maybe not much of a threat, more than the fact that he's just telling black that it's not so easy for you to find some good moves. King c6 played here by Mamikon. And now the knight comes to e3, attacking the bishop. Maybe bishop d3 attacking the pawn would have been the best move here. And let's see what Gharibyan does now. He goes bishop b3. Interesting. You can see how white has actually put all his pieces on good squares, has a good structure. Maybe now it's time to just break with the move c4. Yes, excellent move played by Nihal Sarin. So c4 is on the board. And Mamikon down to 1 minute 40 seconds. You really don't want to be taking here because it spoils your structure. So Rook b7 played. Let's see how this game continues. You want to maybe push the pawn. You want to push d5. There are so many options here. So many options, that too in the last round game of the World Juniors. The stress could not be higher. Look at Nogerbek's time. He's down to 1 minute after pressing the clock. Gets 30 seconds more. 1 minute 30 seconds. Rook takes b5. And now you can see that although white has an extra pawn, this a pawn is a big monster piece. And that's the reason why Nogerbek sacrifices his rook. Takes here, bishop takes seems like a normal move here. Bishop takes a4. And we reach a resulting position that is so interesting. Rook takes a4. We have a rook and a knight versus two rooks. White has 3 pawns, black has just 1. So if someone can play for a win, it's only white. But then again, such positions are very difficult to convert. So Rook b8 played here, and Nogerbek now has 30 extra minutes on the clock as we just hit move number 40. He brings his king up to f3. And Mamikon now plays Rook b4. Well, if the rooks are traded, then the game would be quite drawn in a straightforward fashion. So Nogerbek goes check. And now if you move the king, then you have to calculate the consequences of Rook takes f6. Or else you can block with the rook. Then you will be left with only one rook in the position. Not an easy decision. Gharibyan goes Rook b6. And so, will he take here or will he not, is the question. Nogerbek in deep thought here. I guess taking the rooks just... Ooh, he takes it. He takes it. Wow. That is a bold decision. Of course, king takes would be a massive blunder because of check here with the knight. And then a fork. So you have to take with the rook. But that's such a big decision there by Nogerbek. And Mamikon takes back with the rook. If white could somehow magically win this pawn, then a knight and 3 pawns would be winning. But winning that pawn is not at all easy on f6. Well, he goes king to f4. And now Mamikon can either stop the king from by playing Rook b5 on the 4th rank, or he can just move his king. He goes for the counter attack. He goes on the offensive with Rook b2. And now we are again down to last 16 minutes for white, 12 minutes in fact, 18 minutes for black. And Nogerbek goes knight g4. He is ready for the exchange of pawns on g2 and f6. The game would be drawn then. So will, yes, Mamikon takes, rook takes g2 and knight takes f6. So this position is well known in chess literature as a draw. White has a minor piece and two connected pawns, be it a bishop or a knight. Both the positions are drawn. Mamikon brings his king to d6. The players could agree to a draw here, but Nogerbek has nothing much to lose. He can continue trying. e5 check. And you know, in such moments, you should definitely try, because a win would mean directly the title. A draw would mean here that white would finish third. So that's the big difference here. Meanwhile, for Gharibyan, a draw would be fine, because then he would have at least a share of joint first. King e4. What is the way in which you draw such a position? Well, you just keep your rook behind the pawns. That's the most important thing. First, a check makes all the sense. Nogerbek moves his king to d5. And now you can wait. Rook e1, just wait here. But he goes rook a2, which is also fine, because now he wants to give a check from here. So Nogerbek brings his knight back so as to meet the check with the knight block. Mamikon gives a check. And the knight blocks it. Knight to c5. And now the rook comes to a1. Again, ideal spot for the rook so as to check from the side as well as from the bottom. Now it is interesting to see what Nogerbek does to progress. He goes knight b7. With knight b7, there is no check here, but rook b1 attacks the knight. Now the knight can move to d6. He moves it. He moves his knight to d6. And perhaps now we are ready finally for knight f5 check, king d7, e6 check. Rook to f1, stopping knight f5. And he plays his knight back to e4. Well, now black can again go back to a1. But he goes rook e1, keeping an eye on the knight. And a very nice move, knight g3. Now the knight is coming to f5 and there is no way to stop with rook f1. Because rook f1 is controlled. Knight f5 is the threat. King goes to d7. Do we push the pawn? But then rook takes pawn is a free pawn. So he goes knight h5. And maybe he's planning to go knight f4 check or even knight f4 to e6 check. So he goes king e7. keeping the king in the center of the board. Well, this for now, the players have played several moves and it must be tiring for both of them, especially considering such an important round this is. Knight f4 played, and Gharibyan can actually again try to repeat a bit. He plays king to d7. Nogerbek goes knight to g6. Well, maybe one idea now is to play e6 check. You don't have this square, you don't have this takes. But the point is, after rook takes, there is knight f8 check and a fork. So rook g1 played. And he pushes his pawn to e6. Wow. The pawns have started to move finally. King d8 is possible. King e8 seems also logical. Just keeping the king there. King e8 played. Knight comes to e5. You can see Nogerbek slowly feeling that he's made some progress here with the fact that he was able to push e6. Rook d1 played. And now, where is the next plan of action going to come from? So the knight comes to c6, and the idea is to defend the pawn on d4 and then move the king to d6. And let's see how Gharibyan responds to it. There are many ways to. He goes rook e1 and now king d6, rook d1, pawn push to d5. So we reach this position. The rook comes to d2. It's still a drawn position, but white definitely has made a lot of progress. And the knight comes to b4. Mamikon is down to 30 seconds on the clock. Time is going to play a crucial role now in the position, and also the nerves of this being the final round and the winner gets the World Junior title. It's not easy to withstand. And he blunders. And look at Nogerbek there. He knows this is a mistake. The right move here was rook d4. But rook d1 is a bad move, because now you can play king c7, d6 and d7 is just winning. He finds it, king c7 on the board. If you would have played rook d4, this was not possible because the knight is hanging. So rook d1, king c7 found. And now how do you stop d6, d7? Such a key idea. With 20 seconds left, Mamikon has to find something truly spectacular. He goes king e7, and clearly you mustn't rush with d6 because of king takes, and there is no way to make progress here. So knight c6 check I like, because if the king goes back, then d6 would be very strong. So the king comes up. And now if you push the pawn, then king f7. So the right move is to bring the king back, and he does it He does play the most accurate way. Nogerbek now. Is this still a draw? Not really. It's a win for white. Black waits. And now how should what does white do? White goes knight e5. Excellent move. Because now the threat is knight check, push the king further away, and then e7, e8 wins. Rook comes to d4. And now, if you push the pawn, then rook d5 is a great move, and the game ends in a draw. So you can't be in a hurry. He goes for a check, which is the best move. And now where can the king go? This knight has done a lot of work. The king has to move. 17 seconds for Nogerbek. For Mamikon. Nogerbek has 2 minutes 37 seconds. King comes to f5. And look at Nogerbek. He knows he's almost winning there. The stress and the nerves of winning the World Juniors is not easy to handle. Will Nogerbek botch this up, or will he find the win? Two minutes 5 seconds left for Nogerbek. And he's calculating and recalculating and making sure that all the variations are correct. And e7 has been played. e8 queen coming in. The only way to prevent it from queening is rook e4. He plays it. But now just knight c5. He plays the knight there, attacking the rook. And the rook needs to move. But wherever it moves, knight e6 is coming in, and so the e-pawn would queen, and Mamikon resigns the game. Nogerbek has tied for the top spot with Emin Ohanian. Look at Nogerbek's expression. He has won it. He says sorry to his opponent. His opponent is like, well, you tried and you won fair and square there. The last endgame of knight and 2 pawns versus a rook is a draw. But Nogerbek's persistence paid off. He kept fighting till the very end, and the game ended in his favor. He has tears in his eyes. This is what this title means for him and the Kazakh chess. The tears on his eyes show what a class act and how much this victory means to him. Look at that. Look at the emotions. Smile there on his face. Tears of joy. Tears of happiness. Who has said that chess is not an emotional game? Well, it is an extremely emotional game, as you can see. And Nogerbek, haha, look at him. Look at him just there. He's not even having the energy to get up. From not giving up in that equal position to now winning the World Junior title. I think really a lot of things are flashing ahead of him there in his eyes. And so Nogerbek Kazybek becomes the champion. Emin Ohanian finishes second. Luka Budisavljevic finishes third.
Prashant. Prashant. Get the people. 10 to 15 minutes you completed. Jaldi. Mr. Perfect. Start. Here after no.